the chat below so we can see where you are. So, as you can see, the foundation has been in existence for 7 years now. And with the support of our experts, the foundation communicates through a variety of educational solutions, including publications, lectures, and practical classes. Now, you can contact the foundation through our Facebook pages and also follow us on Instagram. Now, it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you our expert speaker this evening, Dr. Dorian Dugmore from England. And Dr. Dugmore is the founder and CEO of the Wellness Academy. He has a Ph.D. in cardiovascular medicine and is recognized internationally as an expert in cardiovascular health, preventative medicine, and wellness. During his long and impressive career, he's initially played and then coached football internationally. He's run 26 marathons, was program director for the world-famous Toronto Rehabilitation Center for recovering heart patients. And he built the award-winning Adidas Corporate Wellness Program, as well as the Fit to Manage program for football managers, and has served as the nucleus for sport cardiology in Europe. His wellness programs have achieved both national and international acclaim. So please help me welcome Dr. Dugmore. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Scott. Great to be here this evening. Good evening, everybody, and look forward to talking to you about this very, very important topic, which is stress and resilience, and how you actually try to manage that. But before you do that, you have to realize exactly what goes on in terms of stress. So today's world is a very, very challenging world. To sustain high performance, you've got to deal with ever-increasing change and rapid pressures that cause all sorts of challenges and problems. There you can see the corporate athlete, half in a business suit and half as an athlete. And it's so important to actually marry both concepts to really be in good shape to deal with stress and build resilience. So very, very important. So here's the human brain. It's a very, very important part of our body, of course, and it's the center of control, the center of thinking, and very often the center of good health. What we really realize about the human brain is that it's 2% of your body weight, but it uses 20% of your energy. And 73% of the brain is water. So if you forget everything else that we've said this evening, then drinking lots of particularly still water is vitally important to nourish the brain. And the brain contains billions and billions, actually 86 billion nerve cells. And here is a shot of two brains. The one on the top of the screen, as you view the screen, is a 35-year-old brain. And the one on the bottom of the screen is a brain in the 80s and 90s. And you can see what's happened to the brain matrix. As the person ages in decades, you can see that the spaces between the convolutions and the brain matrix increase as age can take its toll. And here's a brain cell. It's called a neuron. And when you look at that sort of triangle in the middle of the cell, as you view the screen on the left-hand side, you can see that next to that triangle, there's lots of twig-like structures. The triangle is called the axon. It's the center, the nucleus of the cell. And then the little twig-like structures are called dendrites. That's a very, very healthy brain cell. But what happens as we age is that those dendrites, those sort of twig-like structures around the axon, start to disintegrate and they get reduced. That happens as the cells in the brain age. And of course, that takes a long period of time for that to occur. However, something else can cause degradation and degeneration of those brain cells, and that certainly is stress. So As the functionality of the brain changes as we age, then certain things decline. And one of the things is our ability as we age, particularly in the later decades of life, to process information. So at a 75 to 80-year-old brain, it can take as much as twice as long to process information as it did when we were in our 20s. Doesn't mean you're ineffective, just means things probably take a little bit longer. Um, so why is that important? Well, we know that as we age in decades from 25 towards centenarians to 100, then the lasting life now of males and females has increased. And so a female, if she can avoid the challenges of heart disease, of diabetes, of cancers, many cancers, then they can expect, if they look after themselves, to live to the ages of close to 90. When you compare that with males, it's about 86. And so we're looking at 6, potentially 7 decades and more of life. Why is that important? Well, if you're going to retire from your work and go part-time or actually fully retire, you're looking at a third of your life that you hopefully have got left. And when you reach that stage, those halcyon years when you can take your foot off the accelerator a little bit, then you want to be able to enjoy a really, really good quality of life. And it's so important to look after yourself, to take care of your health and your body as you age. So in that final third of life, you can really have a great, great quality of life and continue with good performance. So important. Well, there's the brain cell, the one that we looked at earlier. And you can see what's happened. There's been a very, very significant deterioration of that brain cell as a result of stress. And constant stress, when you're constantly battling challenges and worried all the time and very, very anxious, what's going to happen is you're going to get brain cell degeneration. And you can see what's happened there on the left-hand side. That will affect the transmission, the connections between those dendrites that we talked about earlier, talking to each other, and that can affect things like your memory. And a particular thing that can happen is it can reduce your emotional control. And you probably see that on a daily basis. A classic example of that is sitting in a traffic queue when you can't do anything, but you always see some people that get emotionally out of control, and yet you're stuck in the traffic and you have to accept what has happened and try and calm and be cool. So that's the effect of chronic stress. This is an interesting slide. It's called the hothead heart, and it features some research from the famous Harvard Medical School. And it cites a study on 1,300 men, average age around 62 years of age, initially heart disease free, but those that were constantly angry and constantly stressed had 3 times the number of recorded heart attacks. That's amazing. And the heart, as we saw in our last seminar, our last webinar, is controlled electrically. And so when that gets disturbed, all sorts of issues can occur. And then you can see another study from Harvard Medical School on 1,600 people, including men and women. And when they were interviewed, they checked their anger levels right before the event of having the heart attack, and anger and anxiety, particularly, and hostility, double the risk of a heart attack. And the 2 villains of the piece, as you look at the right-hand side of the slide there, are those 2 little purple blobs on top of the kidneys. They're called the suprarenal glands. And the middle of the gland, those little purple blobs, is called the medulla. And when that gets fired up, when people are stressed, it starts to generate an increase in the production of adrenaline. And when people have too much adrenaline, what happens? Well, the heart rate rises, the circulation tightens, so the blood pressure increases. You get some inflammatory markers that are pushed into your bloodstream, and very often you'll produce extra cholesterol, which, if it's there in abundance, can be a major contributor in helping to block the coronary arteries. The outside of those purple glands is called the cortex, and they secrete cortisol. And you've all probably heard of cortisol. Cortisol has an anti-inflammatory property, but too much of it that is secreted into your body by those glands can actually reduce your immune function. And the classic is somebody's at work, they're going on vacation or on a very important trip for a break in 2 to 3 weeks' time. What do? They make sure their desk is absolutely clean. They overwork themselves to make sure that when they leave from work, everything is organized and okay. And what happens to them when they arrive on the vacation? For the first 2 to 3 days, they're sick. Why? Because there's been a rise in cortisol. It's actually helped destroy some of the cells in your body that fight off viruses and infections. They're part of the white blood cells. They're called the T lymphocytes. And when that happens, you're vulnerable. Add to that, you may be sitting on a plane with people with lots of colds, and air is circulated, and the whole thing is a vicious cycle. And that very often is the effect of too much stress. So there's some of the physiology behind the stress. This is the stress curve. And actually, too little stress is almost as dangerous as too much stress. And Dr. Christian Pickard said, she's a very famous doctor that looked at the effects of stress, says we probably all have 15 to 16 stress resistance factors. Work will use up 8 or 9, possibly 10 of those factors. Family life and other challenges outside of work may use up another 3 or 4 factors, but we've still got 3 or 4 factors in reserve to fight off the effects of stress on our daily life and on performance. But then something significant comes along, maybe the loss of a loved one, it may be some challenges to a person's health, and all of a sudden you are running out of stress-resistant factors, and then you move over to the right-hand side as you view the screen of the stress curve, and you become more stressed, you start to become very anxious, you panic, you can become very angry, and eventually you may even reach breakdown and get burnout. And that is a common phenomenon. We all need stress. What we don't need is too much of that stress. And the other thing that we need is the capacity, which we'll talk about in a moment, to help us handle that stress and build resilience. So important. So there's a stressometer. We're looking at, if we push that needle over to the right-hand side too much, then we're certainly in trouble. I use this a lot. It's from HeartMath in California, and it's called the emotional landscape. And it shows you 4 quadrants. And the way I use it is I say, okay, as you're looking at the screen, the top left-hand quadrant, imagine you're trying to squash 36 hours into 24 hours. You're on the burn. You're out of control. And that's the important thing. You're out of control. You're over-challenged. And pretty much you're having a rotten day where you're not able to cope. Then in the bottom left-hand quadrant, I say to people, so how do you feel when you go home after a day like that? And describe some of the words that describe what's happening when you've had a day like that. When you compare that negative day with the right-hand side of the emotional quadrant, emotional landscape rather, then the top right-hand quadrant, I ask people to imagine a day where they're challenged, but they're in control and they're winning. And when they touch things, they turn to gold. They're just having a great day. And despite being challenged, they're on top of things and they're able to cope with the scenario. And then I ask them on the bottom right-hand quadrant, how do they feel after a day like that when they've had a successful day and then they've gone home. And these are some of the words that people use to describe each of those four quadrants. So the top left-hand side, the challenging day, frustrated, angry, anxious, defensive, no smiles on the face, no sense of humor. How do they feel when they go home after a night like that or a day like that? Then loss of interest, a little bit cynical, a little bit socially isolated, exhausted, defeated, burnt out. And very often that's the place where they'll go for a drink of alcohol to relieve themselves. What's the chemistry of that? Adrenaline and cortisol, the stress chemistry we talked about earlier. Move over to the right-hand side of the emotional landscape, the resilient side. And remember, I said that top right-hand quadrant, the person was well in control of the day, on top of things and really winning. And the words they use to describe how they feel during a day like that is dynamic, passionate, confident, joyful, connected with everybody else. And the key word they use there in the business world is fully engaged. And the one thing they've got is lots of energy. They feel energized. And then the bottom right-hand quadrant, how do they feel when they go home after a day like that? They feel cool, even under pressure, in control, relaxed, peaceful, and very often want to celebrate. So the chemistry of the left-hand side is the stress chemistry. What's the chemistry of the right-hand side? DHEA is the hormone, the anti-aging chemical, hormone rather, that really helps us age really, really well. Serotonin is another one that is the brain connector. Oxytocin, the love chemical. All the good endorphin type chemicals. Now, for sure, you're going to spend some of your life over on the stress left-hand side of the emotional landscape. But if you spend too much time there, I can guarantee you one thing: health challenges. We need to be able to move over to the right-hand side, experience positive emotions, produce endorphins, and that will look after our health in a much, much better way. So what are the warning signs of stress? Well, loss of mental clarity is a classic. Prone to distractions, making more mistakes because you're not fully focused and concentrated, feeling separate, feeling edgy. You tend to be a little bit isolated and shut off from others. And when that occurs, it's a little bit like you're a rock in the middle of an ocean where you just can't be helped. And that's a typical reaction. Next one, diminishing capacity to relax and sleep. And sleep is a huge one. Remember, sleep is where your cells repair. And we'll have a webinar in the future on sleep. It's the new exercise. It's the new thing that people need to realize is so important for the health. Other things that happen when you're constantly stressed, your self-confidence gets eroded and you lose that confident capacity to cope with whatever comes your way. Spending more time and more energy than you're able to recoup is a classic, where you're exhausting yourself because you've really overstressed your energy reserves, really. So that makes you feel tired. And that's the new operational norm. You're constantly tired. And when I speak to a lot of people that are very, very stressed all the time, that's a classic sign that they're constantly tired. So you struggle to motivate yourself. You struggle to motivate others. You're not the sort of leadership example sometimes that you want to be. And that leads to an increase in your own anxiety, your own insecurity, and you feel a loss of control. So important. And the things that really are classic that cause you to be overstressed are volume. That means the volume of work, the volume of challenges, the volume of things that you've got to try and do. And if it becomes too much, it's a problem, because the next one, time, is, having not enough time to deal with that volume of work because there's just simply too much. So time becomes very, very pressured. And what you then tend to lose very often is that magical word, control. And that so often is the major factor that is affected by producing too much stress, actually not being able to control things. And in the business world, very often it's people in middle management that are getting lots of work put on their plate. They're getting pressure from above, they're getting pressure from below, and they are not in control. And that can cause lots of stress when that occurs. So important. Um, the villain of the piece is that little chimp in the middle there. It's called the amygdala, but its famous name is the chimp brain. And the chimp, or the amygdala, is a little center in the midbrain that reacts to stress and challenge and causes those stressful reactions 200 times more readily than the higher centers in the brain called the cortex, the center where you can see the computer at the top there. The cortex is the area that is balanced. It deals with problems and looks at the pluses and minuses. It's very, very capable of delineating between a thing that's a challenge and a thing that's solvable. But if the amygdala takes over, then it pushes all the stress buttons before you get to the cortex, before you get to the top of the brain. And that causes a major, major problem because that reacts 200 times more readily than the higher centers I've just described, the cortex. Now, very often, imagine you've been bitten by a dog when you're in your early years. And suddenly when you're out for a walk in the park, a dog runs towards you, then very often the amygdala will get activated because immediately you remember when you were bitten by the dog and you see another dog doing that and you panic. And all of your body chemistry and the adrenaline, the cortisol really starts to rise up. In the working situation, the practical situation, very often a lack of fairness, a lack of equality, a lack of balance is the thing that really, really affects the amygdala. And I'm going to show you a fun film clip next of an example of lack of fairness, perceived lack of fairness occurring. This is a fun little video shot. So watch this film.
The final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees. But with Sarah Brosnan, we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us. Now gets again cucumber.
Okay.
Now.
We'll move on to the next slide. So that was quite funny, quite humorous, but you can see the adrenaline and cortisol rose in the monkey that was only getting the cucumber because they were angry. They couldn't get the grapes, and so consequently there was a problem. So there you go, lack of fairness and equality. So there's the heart. That's the center of emotional control. Very often, it has a major influence on the way we react to things. Sends 80% more messages, as we talked about last webinar, to the brain than the other way around. So it's a key thing that we need to be very aware of. This is really interesting. This is the heart of a gentleman being monitored. It's actually a husband arguing with his wife. And in actual fact, they are arguing. The wife is reading a map. He's driving the car, and they're arguing about loss of direction. And you can see quite humorously what's happened there. Well, it's not humorous really, because some of the things that happens to the husband's heart rate is when the argument really starts to get going and get heated, the heart rate zooms up from 60 to 80 beats a minute to 90 to 140 beats a minute. And in the middle of the slide, as you view it, you can see that the heart rate is totally erratic. 1 second it's beating at 140 beats a minute. The next second it's plummeting down to 90 beats a minute. What's causing that? Adrenaline and cortisol. And then the interesting thing to notice, where you can see the red arrow on the right-hand side of the screen, is what happens to that heart rate after the argument is finished. And the answer is it remains elevated. So very often the half-life of adrenaline and cortisol when you've lost the plot remains high for a number of hours. And so you need to realize that about your body chemistry. And you need to realize the traumatic effects sometimes of excessive adrenaline and cortisol. So it's important to realize that. And actually, this is the heart rate of the wife. And in the top part of the slide, as you see it, she was asked to think about something that irritated her. And she laughingly said, yeah, I'll just think of my husband. And what happened? The heart rate became very erratic, but the power of each contraction reduced dramatically. And that's significant. That leads to a thing called cortical inhibition. That's when the amygdala, the chimp, takes over and prevents you from reaching the higher centers and making a balanced interpretation of things. Look at the bottom part of the slide. She was asked to think of something that she associated with being appreciated. And she said, well, I thought of my little daughter when she was born, and the first time they placed her on my chest, and a beautiful little girl. I was so appreciative of having given birth to a wonderful baby. Look what happened to the heart rhythm. It's far more controlled, its range is greater, and that facilitates what we call cortical facilitation. Clearer thought processes, clearer decision making, and that very often is associated with being loved and respected and appreciated. And though that slide reflects the thing called heart rate variability. And if you read some of the press this week, then there's a lot of studies and a lot of work on heart rate variability. And if you've got the ability to be like the bottom part of that slide, it's far, far better for your health. And there's back to the amygdala. That little red blob in the middle is the amygdala. And if you're stressed, if you're reacting in an anxious and hostile and stressed way, then the signals from the rest of the body don't go past the amygdala. The chimp takes over. However, if you are relaxed, as we showed you earlier on the right-hand side of the emotional landscape, you go through the hippocampus to the higher centers of the brain, and that's the area that can make a far more balanced interpretation of things. And the bottom line is, in terms of your health, it's far, far better for your health. So important. So personal resilience. What is personal resilience? Well, it's about your mental toughness. It's about your ability to think clearly, get results that you need to get, helps you look after yourself. It builds a certain protection and insurance and resiliency. allows you to have great relationships, and to cope with whatever life throws at you. It's actually building a capacity to avoid failure. And so resilience is so important. I work with a guy called John Sunderland Wright, and he's produced a little an acronym called ROPES, Resilience Model. And each of those letters that makes up the word rope stands for a different thing that will help you build your resilience and control things more effectively. Regulation, that's about planning. It's about timing. It's about putting processes into place where you're not overstressing yourself because you're trying to do too many things at once, but you're actually planning things a lot more effectively, which allows you then to regulate the way in which your days go by. And that's so important. O stands for optimism. We know that all the research around the world that looks at stress relates to people that have an optimistic outlook, because that generates the endorphins that we talked about earlier. And that is so, so important compared to people that are constantly pessimistic. And I'm sure you've all heard the saying about glass half full versus glass half empty. Well, being optimistic and being glass half full is probably much better for your health and creates a much more endorphin-like chemistry. A clear purpose. P stands for a clear purpose, a clear goal that you wish to achieve and that you know where you're going and you've got a roadmap to try and get there. So having a clear purpose is so important. E is for energy. And that's where keeping fit, taking regular exercise, looking after your health by physically challenging your body so that it builds up some resilience is very, very important, particularly when times are getting tough. And that leads to the final word, stamina. If you've got lots of energy and you've got a reserve of energy, that gives you stamina. And so building all of those through a good program, through looking after your health and well-being, will certainly help you to build resilience. And that is very, very important. This is called freeze frame. This is taken from HeartMath, and it's a very, very good technique that I use a lot with people that I work with, whether they're in the world of the corporate world or whether in the world of sport. And imagine you've got a problem or a challenge that really you need to deal with. What are the steps that relate to freeze frame? Well, step one is recognizing the fact that it's causing you stress, and you press an imaginary pause button. It's like putting a car into neutral. It's actually, trying to neutralize the stressful feeling. Step two, shift your focus to the area around your heart and breathe rhythmically. Imagine you're breathing through the heart. I get people to actually put their hands over their chest, spread their fingers, and imagine that when they're inspiring, they're breathing in, then they're breathing through the spaces in those fingers into the heart, and then out through the heart. And do that for 5 seconds inspiration compared to 5 seconds expiration. And that will change your body chemistry. And I'll explain more about that in a moment. When you've done that for 1 or 2 minutes, and in fact, Jim Lear in the Corporate Athlete says we should do that every 90 minutes as a practice during our working day, then think about a positive feeling. Step 3. Think about something that you associate with being chilled, relaxed, loved, maybe having a good time, maybe sitting in a hammock on the edge of the Caribbean, listening to the waves coming in and out, and go there. Mentally, just for a brief moment in time, go there. And that's so important. So it's an emotional connection that you're making. And step 4, then when you've done that and you've actually chilled, ask yourself, what would be a more efficient and effective response to the challenging situation that's been stressing you, to the thing that's been really concerning you? And when you do that, then write down your first thoughts, words, or ideas that can help you solve the scenario. That really works. But, the interesting thing is it only works if you do it. And so you've got to practice it on a regular basis to really control things. So what do we do to manage stress? Well, there's a simple statement: breathing. When we breathe in and we breathe out, as I've just explained in the previous slide, it's so important. Why? What happens? Well, what happens is you engage a nerve in the center of your thorax, in the center of your body, in your chest, called the vagus nerve. And when you breathe in a little bit more deeply, breathe out in a more controlled and extended way, it's called a vasovagal response. It's a response that engages more a branch of what's called your autonomic nervous system. It's called the parasympathetic branch. It's the branch that puts you on a relaxed high. The branch that puts you on adrenaline and cortisol alert is called the sympathetic branch. And some people can be so sympathetically driven, producing adrenaline and cortisol, that they're almost permanently switched on. And that's through a thing at the base of the brain called the reticular activating system, the RAS. And you see people react too emotionally, losing control when things really don't need to be that challenged. So by breathing and practicing that more extended breathing in and breathing out is so important. And I mentioned Jim Lear before, the book, The Corporate Athlete. He says that particularly people in the business world should do that every 90 minutes. And you can do it with your eyes open. Nobody needs to know that you're doing it. But what that does every 90 minutes, if you've been stressed, is re-engage the parasympathetic nervous system, the right-hand side of the emotional landscape. And that is so important. Okay. Michael Gray, I work with as a neuroscientist, says, one of the good things you can do at the end of a working day is to do a brain dump. So all the things you've been worried about, then at the end of your working day, rather than take them to bed and worry about them, write them down and park them. He calls it a brain dump. And that's a really good idea to deal with stress. So managing stress is very important in terms of scheduling time for yourself. And that is so important. I work with a very important international coach in the world of sport, and he used a phrase called the 3-lane highway. And he said the 3 lanes in the highway are work, or in his case in sport, performance, family, and the 3rd highway was you. And he said people traditionally spend all of their lives in the other 2 highways, the work, the performance, and around family, but they've spent very little time around themselves. They don't engage in hobbies. They don't have some me time. And that is so important. Hence the rise recently in a lot of work around meditation, around taking time to chill and trying to come down from the stresses and strains of life as it's happened. And there are lots of apps and things you can use to help you. And these are some of them. There are some ideas on TED Talks. There's a thing called Headspace with Andy Puddicombe. There's a number of apps and things that can help you practice some of the techniques that I've actually described to you earlier. And if you have the opportunity to get or use some of those, try them. Because if they can promote your relaxation, move you towards the right-hand side of the emotional landscape, then that's absolutely great. I use this a lot. This is called the circle of control. And it really reflects the fact that don't let things bother you that you have no control over. I'm going to tell you a little story now that illustrates that. I work with a company and their top executives. And one day we went along, actually myself and the guy I mentioned earlier, John Sunderland Wright, and we gave each of the directors of the company a sticky pad with all the sticky notes on. And we asked them to put on individual sticky notes all the issues and challenges and problems they had, one per sticky note, and lay them out in front of themselves over the desk. And then we gave them a giant copy of what you're seeing on the screen. And we asked them then to take all of those problems and notes individually they put on their sticky notes and put the ones that they had total control of, that was simply down to them, to put them in the circle of control, the blue circle as you look at it. Then we asked them to put the challenges and problems and things they were worried about that needed other people to help them solve the challenges, and put them in the circle of influence. And then we asked them to put any of the sticky notes where they had no control, no help from anybody else, no influence from anybody else, and put them in the circle of concern, which means they might be worried about them, but in actual fact, they actually can't do anything about them. And one of the directors, I kid you not, put 40 sticky notes in the circle of concern. And the chief executive of the company said, that explains an awful lot. It explains why I'm getting emails at 3 o'clock in the morning. It explains why you're extremely hypertensive and your blood pressure's through the roof. So working with that individual and actually getting him to share some of those problems so that he doesn't take responsibility for everything is so important. So I love this little circle of control animated sketch, because it really makes you think about the things that are important and the things that actually you can't control. So important. So there are lots of things that you can take from Dual Life that can really support you in terms of stress and resilience. So here's one of them, Pro-Relaxin, a compound of natural sourced ingredients from fruits and plants, helps with promoting positive energy, helps reduce tension, encourages good sleep, has a real antioxidant value, and antioxidants are the things that fight off free radicals in the body. And a free radical is like a rogue oxygen bond. Oxygen's bonded in the body like a couple holding hands. And when that bond gets broken, you get a free radical. And it's like a molecular outlaw. It goes around attacking cells in your body, attacking systems, and causes ill health. And so Pro-Relaxin, and the thing that destroys those free radicals are antioxidants. And there on the screen, you've got Pro-Relaxin and some of the plants and nutrients and things that are taken from that really help you as an antioxidant. And it can help you reduce the effect of free radicals. Here's another one, ashwagandha, property from winter cherries and root extracts. That formula supports your body's immune system. So again, it's excellent. You know, it's great for sexual function. Whole series of different things are benefits from taking ashwagandha. This is a superb product, Dual Life My Mind liquid formula. And remember, liquid formulas and liquids permeate the cell wall a lot more effectively than hard pills. There's a famous study I mentioned before in Canada, in rural Canada, where a family took loads and loads of vitamins and minerals in hard pill form. And they found the majority of those pills in their septic tank. They'd gone through the body and they hadn't been broken down and processed. So Dual Life My Mind liquid formula, got natural botanicals from plants, from raw materials, helps again you protect against free radicals. And there you can see an example of some of the things in My Mind. Dual Life Fiber, very, very important. Contains dietary soluble fiber, and you can see some of the vitamins and minerals that are listed there. It helps reduce inflammatory responses in the gut. And those of you that listen to Dr. Kardash recently in Milton Keynes know how important the gut is and how important good healthy gut is it helps reduce inflammation, discomfort, and people that suffer, for example, from things like irritable bowel syndrome, that puts a lot of pressure on the body and makes you feel so uncomfortable. So, you know, soluble fiber is so important. And soluble fiber is actually highlighted as helping you reduce cholesterol in your body by almost encapsulating the cholesterol and taking it out of your body. Next one, Duralife chlorophyll, again, liquid supplement, minty tasting supplement, supports immune function, has a cleansing effect on the body, supports digestive and immune function. Again, so important to take, particularly if you're stressed. And finally, Duralife Vita C, again, liquid supplement, helps you deal with deficiencies in vitamins and minerals, helps promote immunity. Really good to take in the winter. It helps you fight off colds and viruses. So important. So there's a series of Duralife products that can help us deal with stress and help us build our natural resilience and immunity and promote our health. I hope you've enjoyed what I've had to say tonight, and I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, and I'll hand you back to Scott Lucy.
Right. Thank you very much, Dorian. Amazing. Really, really thoroughly enjoyed that presentation this evening. I mean, understanding the technical aspect of the body is one thing, but then you came up with so many great practical solutions with all of your research and your colleagues. I mean, a whole wealth of information there, and then tying it in with the Duralife products was really the icing on the cake. I mean, we're very, very fortunate to have you on board with us, sir, and I do appreciate everything you said this evening, as I'm sure everybody else does. And I think we can look forward to hearing from you again quite soon, right? Exactly. So I believe it's Wednesday, the 28th of February. So no, we're going to wait a whole month. Oh my goodness. We're going to be talking about exercise is medicine, and you know, building up this library of webinars that you've done, which we are recording, and we will be able to, you know, be plugged into some of these if you've missed the earlier ones, and certainly share them with your family and friends, because this is amazing information that we're getting, and I don't think you'd find that really anywhere else unless you were to attend many seminars. So folks, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Dugmore, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Get in touch with us on the website details there that Camille's put up, and we'll speak to you soon. Take care now. Good night. Bye-bye.